There have been many claims and counterclaims made publicly about the LLFRS, that's the Lower League Flood Relief Scheme. What we hope to do here is to take a factual and balanced look at the cost of what's been proposed. We will examine what has been estimated and what has been planned. This is a handy graphic from the floodinfo.ie website. That's the official website of the OPW for flood protection. It sets out how many properties will be protected and from what. It claims to protect 2,100 properties from a 1 in 100 year river flood and a 1 in 200 year tidal flood. It will provide 1 kilometre of riverside walkway and 20 million for repairs of historic walls. And it claims to do this for the sum of €140 million. We will examine some of these claims in this presentation. In the OPW options report published in early 2017, the capital cost was estimated at €108 million. It comprises of measured items of €49 million plus prelims and unmeasured items of €9.9 million. That's an important figure for later. Contingencies, fees, land costs, bringing the total to €108 million. We undertook an estimate of the same drawings and found that it would cost €159 million for the same items. These estimates, however, had some significant and obvious omissions. In particular, there was no allowance for increases in specification. There's no allowance for inflation to present day rates. And the €20 million for key wall repairs is not included in the published estimates. So how did we arrive at our figures? Each intervention and each drawing was measured separately, and we did digitally and methodically. As you can see from the slide, each dimension is coded according to the drawing it relates to. We then prepared a bill of quantities. The figures in green are live linked to a drawing as shown on the previous slide, and the blue figures contain a built-up rate for each description. Here's an example of a built-up rate for an earthen berm. The rate is broken down into labour, plant and material in column A, the description in column B, the quantity in C, the unit rate, the rate of the individual item, and the waste factor, giving us a total amount for the earthen berm. This process is repeated for each intervention on each drawing until we get to a total figure here of €81 million. We've undertaken a process that is methodical, rigorous and auditable. It contains detail that is relevant to each drawing in the information pack. The OPW estimate, on the other hand, does not measure all items on the drawings. There is a 20% allowance included for unmeasured items amounting to €9.9 million to cover this. The estimate does not reference which drawings they relate to, so it's not always clear what section of the work they represent. In an effort to establish where the €140 million came from, we need to do some further investigation. The original options report looked at 3 slightly different options, all based on direct defences, which comprise walls and embankments. Option 1 is the option presented in the drawings, which is the capital cost of €108 million plus maintenance totalling €127 million. Option 2 has a capital cost of €101 million plus €18 million for maintenance, amounting to €119 million. And option 3 has a capital cost of €117 million plus maintenance of €21 million, giving €138.5 million. As this is the closest to the quoted €140 million, we can only assume this is where the figure originated. If we compare the LEEF flood plan to other similar but smaller schemes in the area, we see that Blackpool has gone from 14 million to 20.5 million, and Douglas from 11.8 million to 20.4 million. This equates to an increase of 40% for Blackpool and 73% for Douglas. Blackpool has not yet commenced and Douglas has not been completed, yet there is no cost increase indicated for the LEEF project. Given this is the largest flood defence plan ever planned in the state, in mostly an urban environment with complex tidal and groundwater issues, we must ask if this is credible. We're going to look at just a few variables here listed, including tender price inflation, pump chambers, services, diversions and alterations, underestimation of items, quay wall restoration and increases in specification and scope. The Society of Chartered Surveyors has maintained a tender price index since the beginning of 1998. They track the movement of tender prices across the industry twice yearly. Tender price levels are now in excess of where they were at the peak of the boom in the second half of 2006. Since the OPW estimates were produced in late 2016, there has been 30.3% increase in tender prices. This equates to 15 million euros net and 25 million euros including prelims and contingency. The LEEF estimate was done in 2018 and would have 16.9% tender price inflation. Here's a graph showing the tender price inflation that we just spoke about. There are 42 planned pumping chambers in the design. The pumping chambers are envisaged to pump excess surface water away from flooded areas. These are included at €75,000 each. Now a lot of work has to be done for this figure, including sheet piling, excavation and concrete works, mechanical, electrical and backup systems, dewatering during construction, and all done in an urban environment. What we've allowed for is based on an actual design but in a green field, and this equates to 450% more than the OPW allowance. A more credible figure is taken from the Clonakilty options report from 2016, which estimates their pumping stations at 504,000 each. This equates to 670% more than the OPW allowance. The pump chambers planned for the Lee will be mainly in high density urban or trafficked areas, which will bring technical challenges and costs. At this point, I'd like to re-examine the graphic at the front of the floodinfo.ie website. It clearly states that there is €20 million included for the repair of historic walls. The official estimate does not contain any allowance for historic quay wall repairs. Taking just these items we've examined and adding them to the estimates gives us a very different picture of costs. These are the items in red, and when the on-costs are added, the figures are astounding. The OPW figure becomes 252 million and the LEEF figure becomes 283 million. The quay wall repairs are added at the end as it is a separate, self-contained element as distinct from flood defence. When we revisit the earlier graph with the updated figures, it shows the revised figure of 283 million, and this equates to a 102% increase on the original 140 million quoted figure. But this is still not the full story. We found that some items have been significantly underestimated. You can see here an item 1.3 is for the removal and reinstatement of existing river wall and railings at €50 a metre and regrading of existing footpaths at €41.09 a metre. And this is the wall in question. You can see here the railings to be removed and reinstated. This here is the wall to be removed and reinstated, and the reinstatement here looks like if it's stone faced. And this has to be all done for the sum of €50 a metre. And this is the cross section of what we're looking at. This here is the wall to be reinstated, and this is the railing to be removed and put back. The floodinfo.ie website has been very instructive in showing what the completed flood defence plan is supposed to look like. The images look great. The only thing is, it's an entirely different scheme to what is costed. We're going to look at this in a bit more detail. So this is the view looking towards Fitzgeralds Park, and here we can see expansive paved areas and steps down to the river and landscaping. And this is the Fitzgerald Park boardwalk, what it's supposed to look like, with steps down to the river, a boardwalk, lots of low walls, and landscaping. Here's the original plan for the Fitzgerald Park area, and it's a vastly different proposal to the images produced. We can see here that the original plan had a raised walkway along this area here and ramps up to it here. There was no other interventions. And what's proposed now at the moment is a total regrading of the whole area and a boardwalk here and steps down to the river, all of which are not now included in the estimates. So what is costed? Here we have a sheet piled wall on the left with a railing, a paved area and steps up to it. This is another cross section showing a low retaining wall, a glass railing here, and a narrow footpath and a ramp up to it from the pond area of the park. And this is the cross section from the existing museum. It shows again here a retaining wall, a raised platform, a railing, and steps up to it again. So in the original estimate, there's 2.57 million euros allowed overall for the Fitzgerald Park element. 93% of this is for walls and direct defences. There's this figure of 41.09 euros, and it appears a lot in the estimates and is the only rate for new paving. This is sufficient for a concrete footpath, but nothing more. And then there's 100,000 allowed for landscaping in an area like Fitzgerald Park, which would be considered very optimistic. There's also no allowance for the boardwalk as shown in the images. Next we move on to Morrison's Island. Morrison's Island is comprised of Morrison's Quay and Father Matthew Quay and is the centrepiece of the LEEF flood plan, though it is dogged in contention. It is one of the lowest parts of the city and is often subject to tidal flooding. The budget allowance in the OPW estimate for construction work here is 2.82 million euros. So this is the Morrison's Quay. Note the bridge, bollard railings and paving. Here the bridge is to be modified and a boardwalk included. There's granite paving, same as Patrick Street and Grand Parade, and stone bollards and railings, and a new road paving. This is the view from South Mall. Note the new pavings, the stone bollards and the viewing platform. And here's the extract of the OPW estimate for that area. It comprises of just 10 items for all the work that is shown, totaling 2.82 million. Our estimate is 13.5 million for the items in the option 1 drawings for this area. This includes raising but no other work to the bridge. So this area has been underestimated by 10.7 million euros. It means that all of the 9.9 million for unmeasured items mentioned earlier in the OPW estimate will be expended on just this area, plus an additional 800,000. And this is before any of the bollards, boardwalks, footpaths or other public realm is taken into account. In all the images in the city centre, the pavings are shown as multicoloured granite, the same as Patrick Street and Grand Parade. This is the image for George's Quay. And here's the OPW allowance for George's Quay, showing again €41.09 for footpaths per square metre. And a lot of work has to be done for this rate, including breaking up and removing, putting down stone and concrete base, curbs, working around existing utilities in the ground, and all in a city centre environment. What then should a reasonable cost be for this work? We know from the Cornmarket Public Realm Feasibility Report by Cork City Council that the public realm upgrade, similar to what's being proposed, was €850 per square metre in 2005. That's a 2,000% difference in cost, or a factor of 20. And applying a 17% tender price inflation since then will give us a present day rate of €995 per square metre versus the OPW rate of €41.09. We don't know how many square metres of pavings there is in the city centre, but there, from the images, there's quite a lot. When we look at maintenance, we have to ask if this is sufficient analysis. This is the only reference to it in the options report, a 2-line sentence stating that the total maintenance cost over the 50-year lifespan is estimated at 1% of the construction cost in net present value terms. That relates in option 1 to 19.28 million. %1 of construction costs is a very arbitrary method to assess maintenance costs. It bears no relationship to the work involved or the figure to which it is derived. The maintenance requirements for sheet piled walls would be very different to the maintenance of dozens of pumping stations, for example. Life cycle cost analysis estimates total inputs in terms of staff, maintenance, repairs and replacements over a set period in net present value terms. This would be a significantly more accurate assessment on which to base an investment decision. Construction projects are characterized by risk, and risk always equals to cost. Risk and cost need to be accurately planned, assessed and managed for a successful outcome. In this, the largest and most complex flood defence project planned in the state, it is fraught with multiple risks, many of which have been downplayed or ignored altogether. Probably the biggest risk is groundwater. The city centre is in a tidal area underlain by a complex geology, including gravel aquifers. Groundwater can and has been observed rising and falling with the tides in close synchronization, showing how connected the groundwater is to tidal influence. This will be subject to separate presentations by my colleagues. Cork has a rich history since being formed on some marshy islands in the Lee estuary by Vikings. Corcaig, in fact, means marsh. Monitoring for archaeology will need to be conducted throughout the project, and this will invariably lead to delays and additional costs. As Cork developed, many river channels that flowed between the islands of the marsh were culverted and buried under the streets over the centuries. These are not mentioned in the options report, and there is no allowance for any work to these in the costs. It is not known what effect flood protection plans will have on these historical waterways, and their connection to the estuary will remain open. Being built on a marsh and intrinsically connected to the groundwater, the structures and foundations of our older buildings are very fragile. Alterations to the behaviour of groundwater may carry significant risks to these buildings that have not been assessed or considered. The development of the Docklands is strategically vital for Cork and important nationally. The Docklands too are susceptible to flooding and sea level rise. The LEEF flood plan does not extend here. In the mid-2000s, then Minister, now Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, commissioned the Docklands Development Forum to deliver a report on the development of the Docklands. It contains figures provided by Cork City Council on infrastructure investment required, including flood protection. This was then estimated at €47 million. This is separate from what private developers will need to allow in their proposals. Tivoli too will require investment to protect it from flooding, and we estimate a further €30 million will be required here. So what's the total flood protection estimate for the entire Lee estuary? So we take the updated estimate of 283 million plus the South Docklands figure of 47 million and add 30 million for the North Docklands, and we include an allowance for public realm and an additional contingency of 40 million. It brings us to a total figure of 400 million euros. We know that sea level rise is happening. The NOAA, that is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency in the US, predict up to 2.5 metre rise in sea levels by the end of the century. There are stronger and more frequent storms occurring, resulting in greater storm surges. It is incumbent on any designer to assess these external risks and make adequate allowance for them. The LLFRS, as designed remarkably, does not include for any allowance for sea level rise. On page 196 of the options report, it is proposed to increase the height of the walls and embankments in the future to about 1.2 metres above street level to deal with future sea level rise. This strategy is fraught with many risks and is less than certain to work. The cost for this is not included in any of the estimates. The multi-criteria analysis is the mechanism to assess the viability of the scheme. It establishes the benefit to cost ratio. Anything below 0 is not viable. Here we have three options, 1, 2 and 3, which are basically the same option with differing strategies of how to deal with flow reduction at the south channel. So option 1 at 127 million has a benefit to cost ratio of 0.025. Given what we know now about cost, should this be reassessed? Also, the Supreme Court found in July 2020 that the dams could have prevented the 2009 floods. Would this then render the fluvial portion of the scheme obsolete? Having examined the OPW documents in detail, we believe a true cost for the option as designed is at least 283 million. If we incorporate the Docklands and a reasonable allowance for specification increase, the figure would in our estimation be at least 400 million. This is because there are considerable omissions and underestimation of certain elements and no evaluation of risks. We would recommend that the scheme is reassessed for the current design by an independent cost specialist, and that other risks are evaluated by independent specialists, in particular groundwater risk. Lastly, we would recommend that all other options are fairly and independently evaluated, including full life cycle cost studies.